9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi, I'm Tim Robinson, Editor-in-Chief of AEROSPACE, and with me is Deputy Editor Steve Bridgewater and Features Editor Dominic Ward. Welcome to AEROSPACE NOTAM, another edition of our podcast looking at global aviation, aerospace and space news and what we have upcoming in the next, or the current issue of AEROSPACE, April 2026. In the magazine we cover everything from GA to spaceflight, from airlines to airports, from air law to eVTOLs. But first we've got a little message from our sponsors.
For more than 3 decades, Dan Raymer's Aircraft Design, a Conceptual Approach, has been the go-to reference for understanding how aircraft are created. Winner of the AIAA Summerfield Book Award and the Aviation Space Writers Association Award of Excellence, Raymer's comprehensive book takes you from a blank sheet of paper and new aircraft configuration layout, combining aerodynamics, propulsion, structures, and stability to final sizing calculations and optimization. Now in its 7th edition, the book expands into today's frontier technologies with updates on electric propulsion, low Reynolds number flight, Mars aircraft, and much more. And for those pushing boundaries, it explores advanced concepts like hypersonic vehicles, vertical takeoff designs, and flying wings. Aircraft Design, a Conceptual Approach, 7th edition, is available now through AIAA at arc.aiaa.org. Start designing today.
Okay, and with that out of the way, where have we been in the past month? So I've been, I'll start off, I've been to the Battlespace Advantage Symposium, which was held the other week in the IET. That is a new conference from Cyber and Specialist Ops Command from the UK. So if you think about all the commands, Air Command, Land Command, Naval Command, this is looking at really the kind of IT backbone, or the IT, I suppose you'd sort of say that the central nervous system that are being developed around the world for today's militaries. It's the IT, it's the cyber, it's some of the sort of space stuff. Cyber and Specialist Ops Command, CSOC, used to be Strategic Command. Very, very interesting 2 days, learning about things like the digital targeting web, drones, vulnerabilities of space, and things like that. And one of the most interesting things there was about kind of preparing for the next war, and learning lessons from Ukraine, learning lessons from Iran. But also things like fighting within the WES, as one speaker called it, about the idea that soldiers of the future, you're going to be within a surface-to-air missile kind of engagement zone from the other side. So you cannot now rely on air support. It's going to be very rare. And so how do you get around that? How do you integrate? And it was all about integration, air-land integration, air-space integration, maritime integration. A lot of interesting stuff to take in as well, and some super speakers. So that was me. What about everybody else?
You go first, Dom.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I went down to the National Aviation Library in Farnborough this week. So a really, as the three of us will be able to wax lyrical about, a fabulous facility, and open to all. So not just members, open to members of the public as well. What a place it really is. Just located at the airport perimeter in the hub, as they call it, just around the corner from the wind tunnels as well. Artifacts of many varieties. So original.
I think that's what people don't realise, isn't it, Dom? It's not just, you think National Aerospace Library, you think books, but it's so much more than books.
Absolutely. So we've got posters from KLM's 1930s operations. I mean, these are original posters. Even fabric coverings from 19th century hot air balloons. I mean, come on, where else in the world are you going to get to see these sorts of things and being preserved? Whilst I was there, I did stick my head into the wind tunnel, into the big 24-footer, which...
That's what happened to your hair, is it?
Well, you're a fine one to talk. So so windswept and interesting. I unfortunately wasn't ratchet strapped down and blasted with air, but it's one of those things that really messes with your head slightly, because when you see photos of it, you've kind of got no reference for scale, and then you stand up next to it, and geez, this thing is massive. So it does kind of mess with your head a little bit, but my word, is such an amazing facility. A plug there for the guys at FAST who maintain the wind tunnels, and of course a plug for Tony Pilmer and the rest of the team at the NAL. Please go and pay them a visit. You will be able to spend hours in there. You will not be disappointed, and the guys are so friendly. And if you're lucky, you might even get a bit of cake.
And I think it's also worth pointing out as well that it is very, very close. Obviously, it's in Farnborough. We know that, but in July, Farnborough Air Show, very, very close and convenient if you're visiting the air show to kind of pop over there one day if you've got a bit of time. Spend an afternoon there and go and see what's on display.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
How about you, Steve?
For a number of convoluted reasons, I found myself in Belfast last month, and just so happened that our hotel was next to the Ulster Transport Museum. So I don't know how these coincidences happen, but they did.
Are we sure it's a coincidence?
Absolutely. So I took a walk around literally 30 seconds from the hotel. What a fantastic museum. So there's the cars, trains, trams, you name it in there, but obviously I was there for the aerospace content, and they've got one of the short SC1s, the vertical takeoff and landing demonstrators in there. Obviously shorts with a link there with Belfast. And they've also got a replica of Harry Ferguson's aeroplane, which was the first aeroplane to fly in Ireland. And I hadn't realised until I went to the museum that Harry Ferguson is the same Ferguson from Massey Ferguson. So the big collection of tractors along with the aeroplane. But yeah, if you find yourself in Belfast, really, really, really good museum.
Excellent. Belfast is a fabulous city in and itself. I mean, let alone going for aviation stuff. But same Ferguson as Massey Ferguson.
Who knew?
Okay, well, let's have a look at what's been going on in the rest of the world. News roundup. It's been a busy old time, as usual. And we got some positive news, haven't we? We got some last night, as we record. We had the launch of Artemis 2.
Hallelujah!
What an experience!
4 humans off there for the first time in 54 years. It's beyond low Earth orbit. Amazing.
Yeah, and we know that it's been delayed a number of times. We know that there have been issues, but what a great thing that brought everybody together. And, I was watching on the NASA stream last night, and there were people checking in from literally all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of people, all watching the same thing, all joined, and I think it was a point that NASA were trying to make during the feed, in that this really is although NASA is an American organisation, it really was an international project to put Artemis up there. Obviously, ESA, the European Space Agency, are responsible for a lot in the Orion capsule, and it was good to see Joseph Aspacher there from ESA, interviewed on the BBC last night, talking about the role that Europe had played. And just going back to what you said earlier, Tim, about cyber, Joseph was making the point that we use space. I think he said within the first hour of waking up each morning, most people have used space technologies between 15 and 20 times. Just how much space has changed since we last went to the moon.
It's great to see that amount of enthusiasm. And like I say, it's obviously NASA is an American agency, American Space Agency, but there's a Canadian on board. And the service module is from Europe. So It is an international endeavour in many ways, and it's great to see so many people get behind it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to raise. And I wonder whether the delays that it's had has contributed to the amount of people that actually tuned in last night. Because when, it's been delayed again, that's putting it forefront in the kind of the media stream. That then creates consciousness, creates awareness of this thing that's going to be happening. I wonder whether that contributed to the people that were watching last night and kind of drove the viewing figures up, as it were. Now, I have to admit I am incredibly jealous. So, two of my friends, one of my best friends in the entire planet, just happened to be in Orlando having a Disney vacation. And the rocket was delayed and timed to when he was in the town. So he was there last night, as we record last night, watching this thing go up. And he sent me photos overnight, and I was green with envy when I woke up this morning. I am so jealous to experience 8.8 million pounds of thrust from those RF-25s and the SRBs. Is 8.8 more than a Saturn V.
FOMO 500%. Steve, what's caught your eye this morning?
I'm going to start with a story which transcends GA into the rest of the world, because I'm famous for my general aviation stories. It's interesting the CAA has strongly implied that it's going to make ADS-B mandatory for most aircraft in lower airspace. This follows the consultation they did last year, and it's likely to become the core technology behind electronic conspicuity, which is obviously we've talked about the interface between the low altitude economy with drones and the crewed aircraft. And interestingly, we have that in the magazine this month. Just this morning, I was reading that the US Senate now is progressing with a similar concept in the US that will force or mandate all US aircraft, whether they are civil or military, to have ADS-B by, I think it's December the 31st next year. So they've got at least 18 months to comply with this. And of course, that's come off the back of instances where there have been a number of near misses between airliners and military aircraft, and obviously not just near misses in recent times. So I think ADS-B is something that there's been a significant pushback from the community. There have been problems in the US where some airfields have been using ADS-B tracking to try to charge pilots for landing fees, touch and goes, things like that. So I think it's AOPA, EAA, the big organisations in the US have been very hot on this and saying that ADS-B must be for safety, not for profit. So it's interesting to see the CAA now strongly implying that ADS-B will be mandated at some point fairly soon in the UK.
Interesting. Dom, what about you?
Well, from all the hype of Artemis, all the good news, I do want to touch on a slightly sobering point that we did at the end of March have a really nasty incident at LaGuardia in New York. I just want to kind of bring that one and just kind of say that obviously, our thoughts are with those that have been affected by this. From an aerospace perspective, it's quite an interesting one. Video footage seems to show that the fire truck just kind of rolled onto the active without much by way of approval from air traffic control. Obviously, it's an ongoing thing. It's a very recent thing as we record, so I'm sure we'll get more stuff come out of the investigations from the NTSB, the FAA, everyone that needs to get involved to kind of work out, piece together what's happened. And just kind of on that point, obviously, staying slightly within American airports, obviously we've now got ICE have been deployed across some US, I think it's 14 or so airports, as there's an ongoing dispute with the TSA and pay. So it all seems to be all go in US airports at the moment, and things that remain to be played out and remain to be finalised and finished up. And so we'll kind of watch this space, as it were.
And that obviously, coming back to me, We've also had more developments in the ongoing conflict in Iran. That conflict is ongoing as we record. US and Israeli warplanes still striking targets there. And what's happened in the last, I think it was a week and a half, I think, we had the Iranians managed to successfully strike an airbase in Saudi Arabia and destroy an E3, a USAF E3 AWACS, including possibly damaging some tankers as well, and even some Compass Call aircraft people it might have been reported. So definitely not over. The Strait of Hormuz is still almost sort of technically closed, I think, and jet fuel prices are going through the roof. So what happens next? We're not really sure. There are still obviously, like I say, Iran is still able to launch missiles, drones across the Middle East, and what is the end game? We still don't know. So it's one that want to kind of keep a watching brief on and see what happens. But there's definitely questions there about hardening of facilities, dispersal. We've been talking about this a lot. You think of Operation Spider's Web in Ukraine. You think of also what the USS is preparing for in Asia Pacific. And then you look at how these high value assets like tankers are all crammed into sort of a few air bases within range of an adversary's missiles and drones, and you wonder, are we really learning the lessons? So yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on this, obviously. Steve, what about you?
I've got a Starlink question with a general aviation twist on it. So Starlink, over the last couple of years, a number of private pilots have started to use Starlink in their aircraft. They've got a Starlink sensor and the dish, if you like, which they mount in the aircraft. And Starlink have decided now that they're going to cap the lowest speed on their roaming plans to 100 miles an hour. So basically anything that's slower than 100 miles an hour won't be able to get the Starlink system. And ostensibly this is because Starlink has been used for targeting drones in Ukraine and places like that. So they've generally limited the service to around sort of 50-60 miles an hour. Now it's gone up to the minimum speed is 100 miles an hour. And pilots have argued this is just a cynical push to get more money, because the higher the speed, then the higher the cost. And some of these packages are sort of $250 to $1,000 a month. And it's pretty much 5 times what they're paying at the moment. And as we talked about earlier with ADSB, Starlink is really there as a safety tool in these aircraft. So pilots are using it for situational awareness of real-time weather and things like that. So there's a push to get Starlink now to provide a service at a lower speed for private aircraft. Because 100 miles an hour, there's a lot of GA aircraft that fly a lot slower than 100 miles an hour in the cruise. And
the thing with that is it can be geo-fenced and geo-located, kind of. So, for example, in Ukraine, there are limits that's there because SpaceX restricts Starlink on fast-moving drones. So anything above a certain speed, it can't be used for kind of weaponry. But that's geographically limited, isn't it?
It is. That's right. Yeah, it is. So there are mechanisms in place that can be used.
Okay. What about you, Dom?
Well, some more commercial aviation news, as listeners will be well aware. Commercial aviation is my jam. Willie Walsh has joined Indigo as the CEO.
Yeah,
So-
I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, exactly. So Peter Elba's left, I think, 10th of March with immediate effect, citing personal family reasons, and Willie's now joined the team. It's an interesting time to be joining Indigo. So I think, Willie's experience will be great in helping change, I suppose, the fortunes of Indigo. There's a lot of people that are saying that it's an airline in crisis, and I think in December they had some 4,000 flights cancelled. I do question whether they're trying to run before they can walk, as it were. So, not run before they can walk, but, trying to, not cutting their cloth according to their means. So, 2023 at Paris, we had that mammoth 500 plane Airbus order across the Airbus family. I think it was 320 family. And obviously we've had some updates in the 350, I think it is. 350-900. So with that in mind, and the people discussing it as kind of being a little bit financially challenged, are we finding ourselves in a position where they might have stretched beyond their capability?
So it's interesting. I mean, they've been on going great guns until really last year, isn't it? Really, and then they had cancellations, they had a pilot shortage, etc., and they had a perfect storm. So I'm just wondering whether this is a case of reputation, really, rather than anything kind of wrong in the business plan, in kind of terms of bad PR. So maybe Wash's immediate sort of priority is going to turn around the image. I noticed that shares have jumped on this news. So the market seems to think it's a good move. He's a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens next.
What about you, Tim?
Right. Well, I've got a bit of bad news. Negative news, and the UK's flying lab is to be axed. So that is the UK's National Centre for Atmospheric Science, and it's getting rid of its FAM. BA 146, which is used for atmospheric research. So they said that they no longer offers value for money, significant increase in costs, low planned utilisation. It's midway through a midlife upgrade program, 49 million quid, and it's one of I think it's one of 3 instrumented aircraft around the world. The other one is operated by NASA, and the other one is operated by Germany's DLR. So is it a case of pound foolish, penny wise, or vice versa? It seems a bit crazy to be getting rid of that, particularly at a time when we're making progress on contrail management and contrail research, and people are asking, does contrail will contrail management make a difference, etc., etc. Something like the FAM is one of the things where could probably answer that or help answer that. Maybe you can do it easier now with drones, and again, the 146. The FAM 146 was the only aircraft flying when we had the volcano eruption in Iceland, which closed airspace down. So again, is it one of these things where the UK gets rid of, and then 6 months down the line we suddenly realise, oh, hang on, a volcano has exploded in Iceland. Didn't we have a UK atmospheric research lab that we could have used? So anyway.
And it seems especially crazy. It's halfway through a midlife upgrade, so there's already a significant amount of money being spent on the project, isn't there?
But anyway, what about you, Steve?
I've got a big chopper news. It is last month was don't say it. You see, last month was the Verticon show, and as Dom knows, I struggle to say Verticon without saying Verticon because it's got that sort of Comic-Con tone to it. But it was the Verticon show in Atlanta last month. So big news from the rotary world, as is normal at Vertican. Robinson Helicopters announced that it was moving into the uncrewed market with a new business division called Robinson Unmanned. So they've got a new autonomous lineup ranging from small UAVs right up to what they call the turbine truck, which is an uncrewed variant of its R66, which is the turbine model of its in its range. And that's got clamshell doors and uses the same matrix flight system that Sikorsky are developing for their uncrewed helicopters. MD Helicopters as well were there. They launched a new light single, which was the MD 564, the latest development of the MD 500 family, which goes back to the, if you really want to trace it back to the Hughes 500. Anyone remember Magnum PI? So this is not a new design, but it's a new version of that helicopter, and it's now got a 6-blade main rotor, which gives it increased performance in sort of hot climates and high climates. And perhaps the most interesting for me was French manufacturer Gimbal, and they make the two-seat, the Cabri G2, which has been around for a few years now, very popular with flying schools and private owners in the UK and across Europe. They revealed they're working on a 5-seat version, the Cabri G5. That's turbine powered. It's got a Safran 450 turbo shaft. They've just gone through the design freeze stage on that with a view to start making the prototype. So hopefully the next year or so we should see a new 5-seat helicopter coming out of France. So obviously we've got Airbus helicopters. We've got lots of other people working in this range, but interesting to see a small, in terms of size of aircraft, manufacturer now upping their size, similar to what Robinson did at Vertican last year, where they went announced their R88.
Yeah,
so,
but it's interesting that with the uncrewed Robinsons, they're getting into the uncrewed space. I mean, there's obviously people there with purpose-built drones. You think of people like Wind Racers, Elroy, and now it's people converting, established legacy aircraft, legacy helicopter to be uncrewed.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I'm too young to remember Magnum PI, but all I know about Magnum PI is a big tash. So did the chopper have a big tash at the front?
No, but it had a very 70s colour scheme on it. Look it up. It's very, very cool. And it had was it Ferrari Testarossa that he drove? I think something like that. So it was of its era, put it that way.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Dom, your final news story?
Yeah, so I'm going to end this news segment with a question for you both. So, China Eastern Airlines have just placed a quite sizable A320 family order. Why Airbus and not Comac?
Answers on a postcard for that one. Right. Who wants to tackle that?
It's a good question, isn't it? It's something we've been talking about for a while. Tim, you and I first saw the Comac 919 at Singapore 2 years ago now, and we've seen it subsequently at Dubai and another Singapore air show, and we've said each time it's just waiting for one brave airline to make that big order. And we've said, will that be a westernized airline such as Cathay Pacific? But mentioning when a Chinese airline opts for Airbus, obviously there's an Airbus FAL in China. But no, it's a very good question, Dom, and I'd be interested in knowing what our listeners think.
Well, I think part of that might be is the time it will take Comac to properly ramp up to the numbers, that I mean, how many aircraft that Airbus and Boeing churn out every month. So yes, I suppose you could place an order with Comac for 100 C919s. But if they're only making them a handful at the moment, how they would have to aggressively ramp up, production rates. So it might be that if you still want, despite the huge backlog, despite the huge waiting time for some aircraft from Airbus, it's still your best bet for getting a large number in a reasonable amount of time.
I think that's right, and I think the other interest. I'd have to check this. I'm sure China Eastern do fly some Comac aircraft. I do think there's a point to be said about scale of production. For some reason, I've got in my head 2032 was when they're expecting deliveries to be completed. So yeah, maybe it's a scale thing then.
Okay, well, one to ponder there. We're going to take a break now and now go over to our regular segment of the podcast, Specialist Group Insight. Join us after the break.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Specialist Group Insight segment of the podcast. I'm Seth Moffat, Chair of the Flight Operations Specialist Group, and this month we're taking a sort of high-level look at the effect of the current conflict in the Middle East and the effect it's having on civil aviation in general. To help us unpack some of this, I'm very pleased to be joined by Tim Robinson, our very own Editor-in-Chief. For airlines operating in and around that region, the immediate pressures are fairly obvious. Disrupted airspace, longer routings, tighter margins, and a more uncertain operating environment. But it's also becoming clear that it doesn't stop there. As fuel prices rise and concerns grow about supply and availability, the operational effects begin to spread well beyond the region itself and into the wider airline system. News agencies are reporting warnings from airline leaders and energy officials about higher fuel costs and the risk of jet fuel shortages beyond the Middle East, including Europe and possibly the UK. So today we wanted to look at this as a sort of a broad airline operations issue, not simply a question of our flights still operating in and out the Middle East. Before we begin, I should say that the Society does include members with direct experience of operations in that region, and that perspective is very valuable. And ordinarily we would bring in a guest, who's working in that environment. But in this sort of situation, confidentiality is very important to these airlines, both professionally and operationally. So as important and informative as that would be, we weren't able to find a guest from an airline to come and speak to us today. So Tim and we're going to speak in a sort of a broad, general level on this topic. So Tim, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Seth. So, I mean, this is obviously the air campaign is still ongoing. We're still seeing civil aviation disrupted in a massive way, and particularly because the Middle East or the Gulf is this huge aviation hub, isn't it? It's where everybody kind of transit through, and we've seen Iran sort of striking out at airports in the region. Kuwait, Dubai, Bahrain, Doha airports, airport in Israel even, where they've been kind of firing missiles and drones at that. How does that affect operations there in kind of managing that? We've seen a lot of cancellations and stuff like that, but what from the flight ops perspective, an airport, you're there on the a flight deck, you're flying somewhere like that, and you get an ACARS message or something, and that you have to hold, divert. What's the kind of procedure?
Gosh, that's there's a lot in that. I don't fly in that region myself, so I haven't experienced this firsthand. But I think that a conflict like this or a disruption like this really would be a story of resilience, wouldn't it? So this would affect every department in an airline, and particularly the flight operations departments. Everything from the amount of fuel that we would carry to the alternate airports that we could have available to us. And in the scenario that you're sort of painting there, it sounds like that would be a sort of we didn't know that something was going to happen, and now we're en route and something does happen. I suppose it would be then a more tactical decision that we would have to make. What airports are available to divert to right now? How much fuel do we have? What airspace is available for getting there? That sort of thing. For some of the carriers in that region, like Emirates, for example, they operate the A380, and you can't just take an A380 anywhere, So
Yeah.
there has to be an airport available for that aircraft and an amount of fuel available to get there and land. In the more strategic sense, though, dispatch departments would have to have a high level awareness of what airspace is available to be used. The crew would have to carry more fuel, and there's a cost associated with that. It costs fuel to carry fuel,
You're
that
right,
sort of
yeah.
thing. And I think right now, from what I'm hearing, some of the alternate airports that airlines are holding are quite far off. They're not the airports that they would normally be holding. So an alternate airport for Dubai could conceivably be on the other side of the Indian Ocean, maybe, for all intents and purposes. So that has an effect on how much passenger load can be carried and how much cargo can be carried and things along these lines.
I think also, but for these airports in the Gulf, it seems to me as an outside observer that some well planned and well rehearsed kind of procedures have kind of been put in place already. I mean, being next door to kind of this sort of regional power that has kind of sponsored sort of unrest around the region, that they it seems already that they probably have a plan in there for this sort of thing. One of the things that struck me was kind of stranded passengers and at Dubai airport, where I think they were immediately kind of given water and things like that, and people were looking after them straight away, and there was someone who contrasted it with a story about I think it was in Germany somewhere where passengers were left overnight on on an aircraft at an airport because they'd run out of, I don't know, I think they run out of like the ground support staff hours or something, or the airport had closed, and these passengers were overnight, and somebody had said, well, kind of there's the middle of a war here, and you're getting better service here.
Well, you're quite right. It's such a big system, isn't it? We, from the flight operations perspective, we tend to think more about the aircraft itself and loading the aircraft, the amount of fuel that we have, the routes that we can fly, the airport facilities that are available. But you're right, the sort of spidering effect that comes out of that and throughout the entire airline. What do you do with hundreds of potentially thousands or tens of thousands of passengers? Where do you put them? There aren't hotels for everyone, that sort of thing. And these are things that have to be considered in a diversionary sense as well. When we divert a large aircraft, depending on the nature of the emergency, these are things that have to be considered operationally. There can be situations where you're on fire and it doesn't really matter where you go. You just have to get on the ground as long as there's firefighting and crash fire rescue available to deal with the emergency. That's one thing. And then there can be other problems, like, for example, medical issues. Do we have an airport or a city that we can divert to that has the medical facilities available for the passengers? And then there are other issues like this one, where we might have 400 people that are going to require hotel rooms when we get there, or they're going to require connecting flights on to their destinations by another route, that sort of thing. So all of these sorts of things have to be considered.
Yeah, I mean the other thing also is on the as well as the airports being destinations in themselves for tourism, for business. The Gulf it's a place where airlines pass through, isn't it? Where flights pass through, and so it's now put a pressure there on airlines to reroute. They're already many airlines already avoiding Ukraine, many airlines already avoiding Russia. They're now having to avoid Iran, maybe other places there that are being targeted. Just by looking at Flight Radar 24, you can have a good idea that people are that everyone seems to be sort of squeezed into the Caucasus and Azerbaijan and sort of Central Asia across that, and that's sort of compressing airlines into that sort of narrow, almost a narrow sort of bit of airspace, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and you're quite right. We, as a global aviation community, a lot of us, particularly Western airlines, were already dealing with this, with Russian airspace closures and things like that. And now this has just made things worse. And of course, as we see with the North Atlantic, when you try and shove a lot of airplanes down one sort of strip of airspace, you run into a lot of conflicts with airspace management and things like that. There's only so many airplanes you can put down an airway at one time. So these sorts of things are all things that would be planned and be part of the new infrastructure, that's put in place. And I know, without naming names, I know one airline in particular in North America is routing passengers to India, if I'm not mistaken, as a through flight. So
Right.
the aircraft, it's usually either a 787 or a 777, will stop in London and then continue on to Delhi. So they'll have crew positioned in London, and they'll one crew will take the airplane as far from North America over to London. They'll do a crew change. Maybe some passengers will get off, maybe some others will get on, and the airplane will continue out to Delhi. Now, in the past, that aircraft would probably have gone up over the poles or closer to it and down through Russian airspace, but that's not an issue, right? Not available to them right now. So we'll
Okay.
see, we'll see even more of that sort of thing. The other thing, I think, from the operational standpoint, that's becoming a little more prevalent in that area is GPS jamming and spoofing,
Right. Yeah.
which is a bit of an issue. I know a friend of mine who's a 787 captain for a European airline had shown me a video lately of him flying through that region and the aircraft being jammed, GPS jammed. Now, in that particular sense, in the jamming sense, we've discussed this on the segment in the past, but in the jamming sense, it's I would say maybe a little bit annoying because the aircraft doesn't like it, but it's fairly obvious that the jamming is occurring, particularly in that region, and they have ways of handling that. The spoofing side of things is a little more insidious because there's an ability to trick the airplane into thinking that it's not where it actually is, and it can be more difficult to detect and can involve the aircraft straying into airspace that it doesn't really want to be in and that sort of thing. So this is something that crew operating in this region will have to deal with more, and they'll be on higher alert for that sort of thing.
It's interesting now when I obviously I attend the big aerospace trade shows, and there's been a definite trend there from some of the big some of the kind of avionics suppliers, but large and small avionics suppliers now to look at anti-jamming or alternative navigation technology, but for civil airlines.
Yeah.
Or for civil airlines. So the stuff that you would normally have on a you have on a JDAM to make sure it hits the target. People are now going, well, can we put this on an airliner, or is there other ways, optical navigation, or do we bring back some of the LORAN? Stuff like that. Is there alternative backup things that we can put in just to sort of layer it, because everybody's dependent on GPS, aren't they?
Well, this is it, and this came up at our flight ops meeting last week, is that, in the civil world, we're dealing with these sort of issues, GPS jamming and spoofing and so on, yet the militaries still seem to be available to, or able to fly in these regions, so how are they doing it, and what's coming down the pipeline that will improve navigation and in that sense, make us more resilient to the GPS jamming and spoofing problems. I seem to remember, in fact, it might have been you that reported on it. There was a project in the UK for I think it was an atomic level inertial reference system, piece of equipment that was being developed, and maybe technologies like that will come down the pipeline.
I think that was quantum. That was a quantum navigation, and that's
it.
I think there's a couple of big racks that were flown in a 146. So it's not quite yet sort of a smartphone style level of miniaturization, but I think that's probably coming along the line. There's other stuff like gravity navigation by gravitational fields and things like that people are looking at. So I think it's a problem that's not going away anyway. So I think more and more people are looking at that for civil aviation.
Well, this is it, and perhaps one of the sort of silver linings of these sorts of conflicts and these sorts of situations is that it does have the potential to accelerate innovation. Sometimes when we discover that we really need these technologies, a little bit more funding becomes available all of a sudden, and things accelerate, and maybe we'll see something along those lines. But for now, I think this is very much a story of planning, contingencies, pilots having to be well briefed on the areas that they're flying into, and the potential for GPS jamming, GPS spoofing, fuel not being available, the airport closing unexpectedly. So as I say, carrying a lot of fuel, big diversionary routes to airports that we probably wouldn't normally consider diverting to. A lot of effort over the last sort of 20 years or so has gone into fuel savings, to only carrying the right amount of fuel, not just, the old days where we just filled it up and away we went, carrying the right amount of fuel, because as I mentioned earlier, it costs fuel to carry fuel. It's more weight on the aircraft, and it's more cost, and there's an environmental impact to that. And I think in a situation like this, we have to sort of let a lot of that go now, and take more fuel anyway, and have these contingencies available to us.
And talking of fuel, obviously, oil is going through the roof at the moment. Airlines do something called fuel hedging, don't they? So can you just explain that, and also the impact on jet fuel prices? We're really talking about some there that are, so some airlines seem to be more affected than others, and also, but there's I mean, just in the last 24 hours, I think Ryanair was sort of saying, they might have to cut flights by 10% this summer.
Yeah, I mean, fuel hedging and contracts are not my area of expertise in the operations end, that's for sure. But I can certainly say at a high level that's, as far as I'm aware, that's sort of buying fuel at future contracted rates, basically. So agreeing on rates for future fuel purchases and things like that. What I can say though is that not every airline does that. In fact, interestingly, I had a conversation with someone recently from a European airline that don't hedge fuel. So they'll be feeling the impacts of this more acutely, I would imagine, or sooner maybe than some other airlines. Again, that's more of an airline finance issue than operations, I would say. I mean, the operations end, we're primarily concerned with how much fuel we need. On the finance end of things, they get more involved in how much that fuel is going to cost and how they're going to turn that into profit margins and so on and so forth. But I do know that you're absolutely right. That practice does happen, but not every airline participates, and for various reasons. So it will be interesting to see the different effect on different companies, whether or not they do hedge fuel, as we sort of wade into the next couple of months.
And it seems to be more affected for airlines in Asia Pacific, who seem to be more dependent on kind of Middle East, kind of oil.
Yeah, as far as I understand that you're quite right. I think that there are a lot of Middle Eastern states that rely more heavily on Middle Eastern oil than maybe more Western states. And already we're hearing reports, I think, out of the Philippines of potential shortages there. And I saw a report just the other day that Korean airlines have gone into, I think, what they call "quote unquote" emergency airline management, I think was the term they used. But essentially, it was a reversion back to COVID protocols. And during COVID, we saw things like, for example, skill fade at the operational level, reduced rosters for pilots. I think there's a bit of that happening in the Middle East right now with airline rosters being reduced. Pilots will be flying less. So, will they be sent back to the simulator to do a little bit of remedial training, or, takeoffs and landings and that sort of thing? Will if flying schedules are reduced by 25 or 50%, will the flying have to be distributed a little more evenly? I think I remember hearing stories during COVID that airlines like British Airways were doing that. They were distributing the flying as evenly as possible so that people could get takeoffs and landings and things along those lines. So these sorts of contingencies will be getting put in place right now alongside fuel. The Korean Airlines emergency management, quote unquote, headline is the only one I've seen so far in the mainstream media that has sort of publicly said they're doing that sort of thing, going back to sort of COVID protocols, for lack of a better term. But I would imagine that we'll see a little bit more of that. And I would imagine the Middle Eastern airlines, although they're not publicizing it, I would imagine they're doing that sort of thing already.
Yeah, and we've already sort of had a sort of a little bit of a foretaste of this, or maybe the extreme example in Cuba, where there's no jet fuel there, and airlines have stopped sort of flying there to kind of Cuba.
Yeah,
So
that's right. It affects so much. I know, particularly my own airline, we stopped flying to Cuba when this sort of thing happened, and I remember at the time thinking to myself, well, there are other places to get fuel. Could we not, stop in, Miami or something like that, fuel up, fly into Cuba, pick up passengers, and then fly out without refueling? But really, it affects everything. There's the fuel that we put on the aircraft, but the fuel tanker itself has to have petrol in it to come out to the airplane, and all these sorts of things. That the knock-on effect is huge. I mean, the when you sit at the airport and you look around at all the vehicles, the maintenance vehicles, the buses that take passengers, the fueling vehicles, the firefighting equipment, all the rest of it, they're all running on oil-based products, really. So the whole airport can literally grind to a halt.
well. And obviously, higher fuel prices, fewer flights if airlines are reducing flights. That also, and it's not a flight ops thing, but that means higher ticket prices, isn't it, for passengers?
Yeah, I would imagine so. And certainly on this side of the Atlantic, we're starting to see headlines surface from airlines that are already saying publicly that they're going to have to add fuel surcharges and things like that to passenger tickets to keep things moving. So I think, yeah, it might be potentially a more expensive summer for travel for all of us, unfortunately.
And especially between you kind of east and west, and linking Asia Pacific with Europe, linking Asia Pacific, that where through there.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, that would be the obvious one for sure, but I'm not sure if airlines will sort of take some of these added costs and distribute them evenly among passengers in the network, to sort of spread that out. I'm not sure. Again, that's more of a sort of an airline finance and commercial issue rather than a flight operations one. But I think overall, Tim, I think the side of this that I find most amazing is just the resilience of the industry, particularly in that region. It's not that commercial air travel in the Middle East has stopped.
Yes,
It's still ongoing, which is incredible when you think about it. When you think about what's happening in that region, that things are still moving. These airlines are still operating, albeit at a reduced capacity, and they've gone into this sort of different management mode to keep things moving. They're adding the extra fuel. They're routing the airplanes through the regions that are considered safe, I guess. They'll be briefing and training their crew on the GPS jamming and spoofing issues and things along those lines. So it's an actual incredible story on resilience, really. The industry, despite massive airspace closures in Russia for many of us, and Ukraine, obviously, and now this other conflict region, we're still all moving around the planet in one way or the other.
I mean, yeah, it's a really good point to make. Yeah, I mean, air travel is still ongoing despite this huge war, despite this huge crisis and terrible stuff that's going on. What do we think about the overall outlook? I mean, is this people who've talked to me would say, is this worse than 9/11? Is this worse than the COVID? Is it existential threat to airlines, you think, or is it? And I suppose the key to that is how long is it going to go on?
Yeah, that's a big component, and I think also thinking back to COVID, I feel that COVID had more of a global impact.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter where you went during COVID. There was an effect of some kind, whether that was in South America, North America, Europe. I think in speaking in general terms, I mean, I'm based in North America at the moment, and particularly in the regional sense, regional flying here seems to still be, I would say unaffected. I mean, there's been some effect, I think, on transborder traffic between Canada and the US for different reasons, but I think for all intents and purposes, regional flying is still functioning normally over here, whereas if you go out to parts of the Middle East or Eastern Europe, there'll be, more adverse effects. So I think that at the local level, I think this is a little more regional, would be the sense I would have. At the international level, for the long haul routes that we were discussing, London to Delhi and things like that, there'd be an effect there. But certainly, if fuel prices don't get too high right now, I think at the regional level, things are still moving normally. But it will be interesting to see what happens in the months ahead. If there is a big spike in fuel prices, that might have a more global impact now, and it might affect the regional level, and maybe it'll affect them differently. As you kind of touched on earlier, different regions sort of rely on Middle Eastern oil in different ways, So perhaps some regions will still have access to reasonably priced fuel, whereas other regions won't, and there'll be a more global impact there. But I'm not sure that we've quite seen that yet, although it does look like it's coming down the pipeline. Pardon the expression.
Yeah. Well, I mean, covering this industry for a while. I mean, one of the things that always strikes me is when we go to the OEMs, when you go to Airbus or Boeing, marketing briefings at air shows and press briefings, and they'll always have a air travel growth graph. And they're always fond of pointing out that whatever happens, 9/11, Gulf War One, Gulf War Two, COVID, it always bounces back
Yes,
faster than everyone expects. And I can already sort of see smart airlines there going, okay, we need to get people back. Here's some deals to fly to X for ridiculous prices to stimulate demand and get things moving again. And how quickly the industry kind of bounces back and that growth kind of resumes is always fascinating. We kind of underestimate the resilience.
We do, absolutely. And I think, over the decades, I think technology's helped at that a little bit as well. If you go back 30 years or so ago, we maybe didn't fly we didn't fly with GPS the way we do now, so navigation was a little bit different in those days. We had inertial reference systems and so on, but it was a little more difficult to take longer routes. I mean, now we have newer navigation technologies. We have aircraft like the A350 that has incredible range, So when we have a conflict region, that we have options nowadays to get around these regions that we may not have had 30, 40 years ago with older technology, So I think the technology really helps play a role in this. And also the flight planning and dispatching technology. I mean, some of the stuff that the dispatchers work with, the flight planning tools that they have, and things like that are very, very good now. And they're very good at predicting new routes and fuel requirements. And navigating routes so that they can navigate, based on pressure systems and things like that to save fuel. So there's a lot. I think a lot has changed over the decades to really help with that level of resilience. And I think, as we touched on earlier, with new navigation system, things like that coming down the pipeline, that will continue to improve. And I think the industry will become more resilient as time goes on. So it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm out of questions. How about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of these topics we could discuss all day, I think. But I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about this, and for our listeners, as I kind of touched on in the intro, we would normally bring in someone from the society who's operating in that region right now, but as we learned over the last couple of weeks, there are a lot of confidentiality issues and things like that with our members who are directly involved in that region right now. So respecting that, it's been great to come in and have this conversation with you, Tim, on a sort of a high level, perspective, and go from there.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, we'll obviously on it for the aerospace team and for the society working on the aerospace magazine. We'll obviously be covering this ongoing conflict and crisis and keeping a close eye on it. And let's hope things get back to somewhat normal as quickly as possible. But yeah, it's been great to be a guest on here, Seth, and thanks for your insight into this and some of the stuff that I didn't really kind of think about, like carrying extra fuel, for potential diversions, also skill fade. If you're reducing flights, more time in the simulator, and how you're going to keep these people, not just pilots, but cabin crew, ATC, etc. Current.
Absolutely. Tim, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Welcome back. So that was a fascinating discussion there from Seth and from the Flight Operations Group. Food for thought, I think you'll agree. Let's take a look at what's happening in the April 2026 edition. In the April edition, we got Falcon 10X rollout, airlines under pressure, space tourism, what price green skies, and delivering hope, along with a bit of Iran war analysis. So I'll take editor's privilege, kick off with our cover story, the Falcon 10X rollout. We have a great article on that of Dassault Aviation's new large cabin bizjet. And one of the interesting things from that is, I think first they've gone to a T-tail, which is heresy for the Dassault bizjet family. They normally go for the mid-tail, so they've gone to the T-tail. But also, if you take a look at the nose, it's a very unique reprofiled nose. And according to sources, according to insiders, it's designed for laminar flow. So it's got that kind of like weird little beak there. If you look at it, if you give it a look, you kind of you think, oh, hang on, what's happening here? But apparently it's to do with laminar flow and reducing drag. What about Steve?
Me? Well, I'll stick on a theme and I'll go with the general aviation article, shall I?
Aha! Brief. You and general aviation? Never.
We've got an article in the April issue from Anne Bartby and Louise Southern on protecting the future of GA aerodromes, talking about the strategic aerodrome network that has now been set up. We know airfields in the UK are under threat. Popham is under threat at the moment. Tollerton, not far from me here in Nottingham, has been closed now for the best part of a year for quote-unquote building housing estate. But they don't actually have anyone to build a housing estate on it yet, so it's been closed for a year for no particular reason. Coventry is due to close in June this year, having been run into the ground over the last few years. We keep talking about a shortage of aerospace engineers, pilots in not just the UK but around the world. It's these GA aerodromes where those people come from. It's where that initial spark is lit. It's where pilots do their basic training. So we're saying that we need X amount of pilots by the end of the decade. If we don't have these GA aerodromes, we've got nowhere to train them. The article's really interesting, looks at the importance of the GA sector and why we need to retain these aerodromes.
But it's also a strategic asset, isn't it?
It is.
As we've seen from Iran, not so that you would be able to put an AWACS, an E7 AWACS or a wedge tail into halfpenny green, but you having this infrastructure of alternate aerodromes, some of them with concrete runways where the military can disperse, fan out to in the event of an emergency. That's got to be a real priority, and a wake-up call at the moment is you've got to spread stuff out. There's no point in having all the nice shiny kit in one place, and you've got a couple of Shahed drones, and that they can just take out all your fighters, tankers, training aircraft, etc., etc. The more aerodromes you have, even if they're small, and maybe they can just only operate helicopters or UAVs or whatever, the better. Dom, what about you?
So one of the pieces that we've got in April that really struck a chord with me for a couple of reasons is a piece on Mission Aviation Fellowship, or MAF. Now, this piece follows the delivery of Grand Caravan and the work that it took to get it ready to get it out to Papua New Guinea via the UK for a royal event. King Charles III was on hand to unveil the aeroplane. And it's a really uplifting story for a company that, an organisation that does so much good work to help those in need. And it's a story that really connects with me. When I worked at the Shuttleworth collection, so for listeners that don't know, I used to work at Shuttleworth in Bedfordshire, obviously one of the most iconic collections of aeroplanes and vehicles and farm equipment, of course, on the planet. I was involved in giving a then 100-year-old Jack Hemmings a flight in Stu Blanchard's Miles Gemini. Now, when Jack, who is a co-founder of MAF, alongside Simon King, I think his name was, when they started it up, they had Geminis. So it was really uplifting to get him back in the skies in an aeroplane that obviously he came to love. Now, sadly, we lost Jack last year. Simon we lost in 2020. But these are people that have done really amazing work to build the foundations for MAF to be in the position that they are now. So it was really nice to see the royal approval of the Grand Caravan that they had delivered, and to see the local pilots. I think his name's, is it Joseph Tuer? Was that his name? Something along those lines. Flying these things in Papua New Guinea and delivering aid to those on the planet that really need it the most. So kind of a full circle moment for me. We worked really hard to get Jack on board that Gemini, myself, renowned photographer Darren Harbour. We had a really good day, and we flew some of the MAF guys in Philip Meeson's Dragon Rapide, which is based at Shuttleworth, flown by Jean-Michel Munn that day. So a really nice story, and one that I'm sure when our listeners read the piece, they'll think the same, that it's a really worthwhile endeavour.
Brilliant. Okay. And the other thing that was in the Senate issue is we've got a article contributed by a Hollywood FSX studio, VFX studio, looking at the kind of the synergies or the overlap, I suppose inspiration, maybe you might call it, from Hollywood to aerospace in terms of GUIs, interfaces, cockpit interfaces. How one influences the other. You think of something like Marvel's Iron Man, the suit there from the inside of what Tony Stark looks at, and then you think of something like the F-35 helmet-mounted display system, and how the two are kind of merging and coming together. And it's not just in military aerospace, but it's also in commercial aerospace as well. Touch screens. We've now got generations growing up there who are used to iPads, who are used to kind of pinching and zooming, and how this sort of translates there into the sort of like, aeronautics and aerospace. I mean, there are some. It's interesting that this is obviously written from the perspective of somebody in Hollywood and somebody working with VFX, and obviously for movies there are licenses taken. There are sort of you're there trying to tell a story rather than portray accurate technical information or that kind of stuff. But it's kind of interesting also about where things are heading in the industry, and also whether there's a bit of pushback now of people wanting buttons back or tactile controls. I know the US Navy apparently had decided that they've gone to a completely sort of like a touchscreen interface for one of their classes of ships, and then realised that actually you kind of need a wheel. And buttons, different shaped buttons on HOTASes and things like that, or buttons there are much easier to find in the dark, or you might have vibration, or you might be wearing gloves, or etc., and there's that sort of tactile sense that is perhaps missing from a screen. So I think it's an interesting debate going forward, and in kind of cockpit design, flight deck design, between let's have a massive big screen, and that's what everything's converging on now. If you look at things like F-35, you look at things like the Eurofighter large area display, you look at what's happening with GCAP, it's all one big giant screen, to maybe some more of the old school tactile elements that are kind of built in. What do we think?
Absolutely. I mean, changing the subject slightly, but on the same theme. Yeah, I recently had a new car, and the temperature gauge for changing the temperature is actually on the screen. It's not an old-fashioned. I want the temperature 2 degrees warmer or cooler. I don't just turn a knob on the dashboard. I have to go into a sub-menu, and then find the right plug and it's so difficult to do compared to what would have been a fraction of a second to lean down, reach for the turny knob, which I knew exactly where it was. So and that's in a driving environment. So it can only be worse when you're in an aviation environment, maybe in bad weather, maybe in a high stress combat environment, to try and cycle through a page to find what you want rather than use a tactile dial.
Yeah, completely agree. When you're certainly, using the ship as an example, when you're rocking and rolling at sea, and you end up hitting the wrong thing because it's just so easy to do on a touchscreen, and of course you've then got a case where you've got something else to go wrong. I mean, when you think about using the vehicle analogy, actually, Steve, when you see the lorries on the roads now, and they've got those cameras as their side view mirrors. What's wrong with a side view mirror? That if something goes wrong, you've got more of an issue than just having something physical that will be okay.
The technology for technology's sake, isn't it, really, sometimes?
Yeah, have we gone too far?
Indeed. So what's the final feature you've got, Steve?
Me, I've got a space story which was written by Dr. Robert Jocelyn from Embry-Riddle University, writes for us on a regular basis. It's now been more than 20 years since SpaceX did the Virgin Galactic test. If you remember the Asani X Prize in 2003, where Mike Melville went into space in Spaceship One. It's now more than 20 years ago. Initially, space tourism was unregulated, in the idea being to try to promote it. But Robert asked the question now, with space tourism now catching on, we've got people flying in various rockets and different spacecraft. If you fly in one of these, are you a passenger, or are you a participant, or are you a tourist? And because each of those have different implications. Are you a member of the crew? And I think it's a really thought-provoking. It's a short 2-page article, but it really just makes you think. In terms of a legality point of view, in terms of safety, what level of training people have. Are you purely a passenger? And if so, do we need to look at the regulation and the certification of the vehicles that people are flying in?
Well, I mean, if you're buying a ticket on a Ryanair flight or EasyJet flight, other airlines are available. You're not expected to take part in any safety sort of procedures or contribute to the kind of operation of the aircraft itself, are you? I mean, the most you might be to do is you're sitting in the exit seat, and you might have to be the first one to. Do you understand how to operate the door? So we won't call you a part of the flight crew for operating a door. However, if you sign up for some adventure tourism trip, and you're summiting Everest, or you're joining a crew for, say, a round the world yacht race or something like that, and that's your like a sort of adventure tourism, you are part of the crew, aren't you? You're part of the team, or you're part of the expedition team, and you are kind of mucking in. So, interesting kind of grey legal area, and I think the more people venture into space, the more these, the more citizen astronauts we have. The more people venture into space, full stop. The more these things will have to be looked at, and are you a worker, are you a tourist, etc., etc. People living and working in space to build things. Perhaps in orbit, perhaps on the moon. Kind of blue collar workers, etc., etc. Building things in orbit, and not just doing kind of scientific research there. That's kind of part of their job as being an astronaut. Right. So we've come to the sort of end of what's in the features, as usual, a plea for the magazine. Please send us your branch news and events to Deputy Editor Stephen Bridgewater on Stephen with PH Bridgewater at AEROS Society. Upcoming events and shout-outs. Well, we've got some fascinating stuff coming up. We've got the RAeS Air and Space Defence coming up, summit coming up in next month in May. So do put that in your diaries. That is going to be a top-line headline event. Lots and lots of stuff to discuss there. We've got Iran, we've got Ukraine, lessons from both these conflicts. We've also got, obviously, defence industrial and defence investment plan. Will that be released by then? Don't know. And we've got GCAP, we've got FCAS, we've got future fighters, drones, space, you name it. It is going to be an incredible event. May is also our annual banquet. That's on the 14th of May. If you've not booked a table yet for that, get in there because they are going fast. It is the aerospace social event of the year. And then as we head towards the summer, obviously we'll be looking forward to Farnborough. The team will be there at Farnborough, so do send us your Farnborough news or your Farnborough scoops. We'll be out there covering the show all week. And then obviously we're also going to be there, hopefully there at RIAT. Now, key question there is, will RIAT be going ahead? I think that's been sort of good doing some of the around the kind of rumours there is about will Fairford still be used for operations by July? We don't know. Fingers crossed. Right, finally,
I've just got one more event actually, Tim. Our friends at Runway 25 have got an event on April the 18th at Cosford, which I'll be going to. So this is with Z-Man, who is a former F-15 pilot who went on to fly MiG-21s and MiG-23s out of the Nevada desert. So it's an evening with him. So that's at RF Museum, the RF Midlands, what was RF Cosford, on Sunday the 18th of April. I think that's going to be a great event. You get your tickets on runway25.com for that.
Okay, brilliant. So what have we been watching, reading, playing? Who wants to kick off?
I can take the lead on that one. So I have just started reading Captain de Havilland's Moth, which is the 2025, last year's piece by Alexander Norman. So I'm very much looking forward to getting stuck into to that one. Just as I say, just opened it up very recently. Who doesn't love a de Havilland Moth? I mean, it's the most iconic of the biplanes for me personally. Look what it achieved for general aviation, for sport aviation, and is still being used to train pilots today. Right, Cambridge Flying Group